You know, it was never, ever, ever part of God's plan or any of his intention that anyone should be set over us to govern us. Never part of God's plan. For God always intended for himself to be over us, to guide us, to shepherd us, and to direct us. And so God chose a people, and he blessed them, and he sanctified them, and he made them a holy nation of kings and priests. And their role was to go into the world, and they were to lead all of the nations to God, because they were to see what God was doing in the life of his people, how he was blessing them, how he was caring for them, loving them, providing for them. And so all the other nations would say, if God does that for them, he will do it for us. However, instead of God's people leading the nations to God, God's people became like all of the other nations and demanded to have a king over them. Listen. So it was in the time of Samuel, the prophet, who was set as a judge over Israel. And he had become old, and so his sons did not follow his example, but sought illicit gain and accepted bribes, perverting justice. Therefore all the elders of Israel came in body to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, now that you are old and your sons do not follow your example, appoint a king over us, as other nations have, to judge us. Samuel was displeased when they asked for a king to judge them. He prayed to the Lord, however, who said in answer, grant the people's every request. It is not you they reject, they are rejecting me as their king. As they have treated me constantly from the day I brought them up from Egypt to this day, deserting me and worshiping strange gods, so do they treat you too. Now grant their request, but at the same time, warn them solemnly and inform them of the rights of the king who will rule over them. I want you to listen to this through a discerning ear. I want you to listen to this as you are a farmer, recognizing what is important, okay, in farming. Samuel delivered the message of the Lord in full to those who were asking him for a king. He told them the rights of the king who will rule over you will be as follows. He will take your sons and assign them to his chariots and his horses, and they will run before his chariot. He will also appoint from among them his commanders of groups of 1,000 and of 100 soldiers, and he will set them to do his plowing and his harvesting, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will use your daughters as ointment makers and cooks and as bakers. He will take the best of your fields, vineyards and olive groves, and give them to his officials. He will tithe your crops and your vineyards and give the revenue to his eunuchs and to his slaves. He will take your male and your female servants, as well as your best oxen and your asses, and use them to do his work. And he will tithe your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. And when all this takes place, you will complain against the king whom you have chosen. But on that day, the Lord will not answer you. The people, however, refused to listen to Samuel's warning and said, not so. There must be a king over us, and we too must be like other nations, with a king to rule us and lead us in warfare and fight our battles. And ever since, we have lived happily ever after. Does it sound familiar? In other words, what God wanted the people to know is that the king that they were demanding to be set over them were going to take from what belonged to them, tax them to death, and make it his. My brothers and sisters, we live in a nation where the form of government that we have is the best in the world. Is the best in the world. And yet, we have people who suffer poverty. We have people who don't have adequate housing. We have people who can't find jobs. And so God always intended to be this benevolent king set over us. Because you see, in a kingdom, there are no citizens. In a kingdom, there are subjects. However, in a benevolent kingdom, the king is responsible for the subjects. His duty and his obligation and his responsibility is to provide for the subjects, to make sure that they have jobs, to make sure that they have homes to live in, to make sure that they have food to eat. And so they were rejecting God as king and demanded to have a king set over them, and God said, give them what they ask for. You see, we usually get what we want, or get what we deserve. And so what this feast today is all about, of Jesus Christ the King, is for you and I to recognize that God's people rejected God as their king, and for you and I who are gathered here to reclaim Christ, who is the Son of God, as king, set over us, over our lives, to shepherd us, to guide us, to direct us. That's what this is about. Christ was sent into the world to reclaim what rightfully belongs to him and to drive out the power of darkness, which seeks to convince you and I that something else is better. Well, from the looks of things that are going on out there, it ain't going so hot. It's not going so hot. In 1674, Jesus Christ made 4 appearances to a young nun by the name of Margaret Mary Alacoque. And in one of those appearances, one of those apparitions, he showed her his heart. His heart, which was aflame, which was enveloped by a crown of thorns. And he said to her, behold this heart, which has loved so much and received so little. And then he revealed to her his greatest suffering during his passion. He said to her that the greatest amount of suffering that he experienced occurred in the Garden of Gethsemane. That while he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he was sweating blood, the devil was permitted to appear to him and said to him, why are you doing this? No one cares. No one cares. And then Jesus asked her one question. He didn't say, will you bow down and worship me? He didn't say that. He didn't say, will you love me? He didn't even say that. He said to her, will you be my friend? Will you be my friend? My gosh, you could hear a pin drop in this church right now. You see what it takes to get our attention? You heard it in the gospel. For this purpose I was born, to testify and witness to the truth. And all those who hear my voice, listen to the truth. And as he said to Margaret Mary, he said, I want to promise my people some things. I want to provide for them. I am the benevolent king who desires not to take from them and make it mine. I desire to take from what is mine and make it theirs. That's what happens in a benevolent kingdom. God desires to take what is his and make it ours, not the other way around. Listen to what he promised Margaret Mary. Do you see this image of the Sacred Heart in the church here? It's here for a purpose, and a light burns before it for a very particular purpose. There's one in the church, there's one downstairs in the hall, there's one in the entryway to the office, there's one in the rectory. And it's there because I want all of you to be recipients and beneficiaries of the promises that he made. That's why that candle burns. I want you to listen to these promises. And as you listen to them, think about all of the broken promises that we've experienced in our lives. Of people who have promised that they were going to take care of us. They promised us. And I don't know about you, but one of the most devastating things that we experience, especially as children, are broken promises. They cut deep. Listen to what he said. The first promise he made is this: I promise I will give them all of the graces necessary for their state in life. Life is hard. I don't have to tell you that. I don't have to convince you of that. Life is hard. And what the Lord is promising is what is necessary to get through life. Second promise. I promise I will give peace in their families. There are families gathered here this morning. And the families that are gathered here this morning are experiencing a slice of what is going on out there. And what's going on out there is division. There are broken families. There are divided families here this morning. There are families, people who don't talk to one another. Listen, I've got it in my family. Jesus promised peace in our families. I could stop right there. If that's the only two promises that he made, we'd stop right there, and we would be much better off than we are now. Third promise. I will console them in all their troubles. Fourth, I promise I will be their refuge in life and especially at death. You know, when you're out on a ship and you're in the middle of a storm, you're looking for a safe port. That's what the Lord is promising here. Safe harbor. Fifth promise. I promise I will abundantly bless all their undertakings, so far as they are within the holy will of God. God will bless what we do. Sixth promise, I promise that sinners shall find in my heart the source and infinite ocean of mercy. Seventh promise, I promise that lukewarm souls shall become fervent. He will set our hearts on fire. You know what that means? I want you to think a moment of all of you who are married and think of what you first felt when you saw the love of your life. Your heart started to burn, and you said, oh my gosh, I can't wait till I see him or her again. When's that going to happen? And you know, lovers act kind of goofy sometimes. Well, God won't make us goofy, but he will set our heart on fire for him. Eighth promise. I promise that fervent souls shall rise speedily to great perfection. How many of us complain often about not being able to make any progress in the spiritual life because it's so difficult? Jesus is promising speedily perfection. Ninth promise, I promise I will bless those places wherein the image of my sacred heart shall be exposed and venerated. You want your homes to be blessed? Then enthrone your home in the Sacred Heart. 10th promise. I promise I will give to priests the power to touch the most hardened hearts. 11th. I promise that persons who propagate and promote this devotion shall have their names eternally written in my heart. You know what Jesus is promising them? He's promising you heaven. He's going to write your name in his heart, and nothing or no one will ever remove it. He's promising you heaven. Anybody here want a guarantee of heaven? Raise your hand. 12th promise. I promise in the excess of the mercy of my heart that my all-powerful love will grant to all those who will receive communion on the first Fridays for 9 consecutive months the grace of final repentance. They will not die in my displeasure, nor without receiving the sacraments, and my heart will be their secure refuge in that last hour. Those aren't my promises. Those are his. And we have a choice. We can keep doing what we're doing, okay? And you know what the definition of insanity is. Keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results until you get them, right? How's that working for us? Or we can realize that the only sure way to heaven is through Christ, and to accept what he's offering as promises. So here's the deal. After Mass, out in the gathering space, if you go out this door, instead of going out that door, you will see a statue of the Sacred Heart up on the wall with his arms extended, begging you to come to him. And underneath that statue, there's a table with a list. And I believe that Mary Labate will be out there after Mass. Put your name on that list, that you're interested in having your home enthroned to the Sacred Heart. Someone will contact you. Now, this is not about hanging a picture in your house. So if you think that all you got to do is hang a picture and that's all you got to do, No, that's not what this is about. Okay, this is a process, not an event. This is really about, okay, recognizing who we are and who He is and making Him King over our hearts and over our homes. In the book of the prophet Malachi, God says this through the prophet. Try me in this, and see if I will not open the floodgates of heaven for you. I wished that I had time this morning to parade all of the people that I see in this community who've already done this, okay, so that they could stand up at that podium, all right, and tell you the benefits and see if the promises have come true for them. See, because I get paid the big bucks to say this stuff to you. I know that's how some of you hear it, because I'm supposed to say these things. But when some of you begin to stand up and say, no, it's true, it happened in my house, then you listen. Right, Angela? You want to stand up and tell them? Okay. So, that's it. If you desire to make Jesus Christ your King of your hearts and your homes, straight out the door, right to the statue.